fox can be a spaceship. The world is full of possibilities, and so are you.
PBS Kids brings the adventure. We'll find an adventure, and it doesn't have to stop.
Where no cat has gone before. The moon!
Woohoo! We're on the moon! After school.
The Adventure Tiger.
After dinner.
This is turning into an adventure.
The adventure never stops. I'm in creature adventure heaven.
You can keep watching KERA Kids on channel 13.2 or on these cable providers.
Is your child ready for school? Find out with Learning Heroes Readiness Check, a free online tool for students in grades K through 8. Your child will answer 3 to 5 questions about math and reading. You'll get free resources to help your child succeed in school.
You did really well.
For more parenting resources, visit kera.org/learn.
Funding for presentation of this program is provided by
architect, beekeeper, mentor. A Raymond James financial advisor tailors advice to help you live your life. Life well planned.
Actually, you don't need vision to do most things in life.
It's exciting to be part of a team driving the technology forward. I think that's the most rewarding thing.
People who know BDO.
Funding was also provided by the Freeman Foundation, by Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, pursuing solutions for America's neglected needs, and by contributions to this PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
And now, BBC News.
I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. Arriving for an arraignment, Donald Trump is back in New York to face criminal charges. He's due to surrender to authorities on Tuesday. Unconfirmed video shows the moments before a Russian pro-war blogger is killed. A 26-year-old Russian woman is in custody. Finland will join NATO on Tuesday, becoming the 31st member of the military alliance. Plus, technology from another time. We mark 50 years to the day since the first mobile phone call. Welcome to World News America. We start the program in New York, where former U.S. President Donald Trump is spending the night. He is expected to voluntarily surrender and appear in a Manhattan court on Tuesday afternoon on criminal charges linked to a hush money payment to a porn star before the 2016 election. Trump is the first former U.S. president to be indicted on criminal charges. New York is bracing for that historic moment. The BBC's Sarah Smith is there and has sent this report.
It's not quite a presidential motorcade, but as Donald Trump leaves his Florida home, he's still deliberately grabbing attention.
There he is!
American TV stations carried live his arrival in New York. As a former president, Donald Trump gets the Secret Service to escort him into town, and he's obviously relishing being back in the spotlight.
No president in the history of our country has been subjected to such vicious and disgusting attacks.
He's already using his claim that the case against him is a politically motivated witch hunt to raise funds. His campaign says it's brought in over $7 million in just 4 days. Die-hard supporters outside Trump Tower are adamant that he's being victimized by opponents who want to stop him being re-elected president, and that those efforts will backfire.
He shouldn't even be charged with a misdemeanor in this case, and they're charging him with a felony. Oh my God, they really don't like this guy. They're really afraid of him.
It stinks like a crock of hog drippings. And I've had Democrat friends of mine tell me, Democrats, like, I still hate Trump, but what they're doing to him is totally wrong.
I would take a bullet for Donald Trump, because I know that man would take a bullet for me.
And when he says if they can come after me with this case, they can come after any of you, do you believe him?
Yes.
New York's finest are ready outside the courthouse, braced for any protests or disruption. Donald Trump did warn of potential death and destruction if charges were brought against him.
While there may be some rabble-rousers thinking about coming to our city tomorrow, our message is clear and simple. Control yourselves. New York City is our home, not a playground for your misplaced anger.
Mr. Trump may yet face other, more serious criminal charges. A special counsel is looking into whether he should be prosecuted for inciting the January 6th riot at the Capitol, as well as the hundreds of classified documents the FBI found at his home in Florida. And in the state of Georgia, he could yet be charged with trying to unlawfully alter the result of the 2020 presidential election. The New York District Attorney who's bringing the case against Trump insists it has nothing to do with politics. It's all about the law. But there is no doubt, whatever happens inside this courtroom will have a huge political impact.
We can take a look at the legal perspective now with Joe Moreno, who's a former federal prosecutor sitting with me here in the studio. Joe, thank you for joining us. We are all sitting on the edges of our seat waiting for the moment where we get to find out what this indictment is all about. From the reports that you have seen, is it possible that there are charges included in this indictment that come as a complete surprise? What are you looking out for?
I mean, I almost hope so, because as reported, the case seems really weak. It seems like it's stale, it seems like it relies on a tenuous legal theory, and it relies on Michael Cohen, who was a convicted liar in a federal court. So I hope that the prosecutor's office in New York City would not put us through this unless they had a really good case. And that's certainly possible. This case may have nothing to do with Stormy Daniels. It might be ripe, it might be strong, it might be a slam dunk, but I guess in 24 hours we'll find out.
From the reports that you've seen, one of the big criticisms, of course, of this case is that this is a political witch hunt being pursued by the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. Is there any evidence that actually proves that?
Well, again, we don't know until we actually see the indictment sometime tomorrow afternoon. It's not a great look, though, that when Alvin Bragg was running for district attorney just a couple of years ago, he kept vowing he would investigate Donald Trump. So I think if we learn anything from this whole situation is that hopefully when individuals run for office that involves law enforcement, they won't kind of base their candidacy on promising to get people. They should be investigating crimes, not individuals.
But he could certainly be pursuing this case because he has the evidence there. From your experience as a federal prosecutor, would a district attorney move forward with a case if it wasn't airtight, so to say?
I hope not. I mean, Alvin Bragg's a smart guy. So putting aside whether you agree with his politics, he's a smart guy. He's been a prosecutor in the past. Now he's elected district attorney in one of our most important cities, so it's an extremely powerful office. So again, I hope he would not bring this case forward unless he felt very strongly and he convinced a grand jury that, in fact, the case should move forward.
We have been asked many questions, of course, about whether there is a precedent for this, whether we've seen similar charges in the past, and if anyone has been convicted of the charges we're anticipating to come out of this indictment. What is the background to this?
Well, books and records cases or accounting fraud, that's common, right? So individuals are convicted of accounting fraud all the time. The theory here that it's sort of the accounting fraud is coupled with a campaign finance violation, and campaign finance laws are federal, not state. That's what makes what we think the prosecution theory is a little, like I said, tenuous. Again, that's based on what we think we know. It could be airtight, and we'll find out tomorrow. But based on what we've heard, this could be a bit of a difficult case to prove.
I want to ask you about the other side of the story, which is, of course, Donald Trump's legal team. What is their strategy going in?
Well, I think they'll attack the age of the case, right? I mean, the statute of limitations, which is the time period in which you're supposed to bring cases like this, is 5 years. This sounds like this case goes back to October of 2016, which is almost 7 years ago. So they have to have a good argument as to why, on the prosecution side, this case should be allowed to go forward. The defense will certainly attack that. They'll also attack that coupling of state and federal law, which in that respect we don't think has been argued before. And then finally, if this goes to trial, I assume that they will take a strong advice of counsel defense, which is to say, Donald Trump is not a lawyer. He relied on Michael Cohen, his attorney, to kind of, govern this transaction, and he assumed that what his lawyer told him was correct and accurate. So I think you'll see some combination of those arguments over the coming months.
We're hopefully going to find out some more information on Tuesday when we see that arraignment happen. Okay, Joe Moreno, former federal prosecutor, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, our North America editor, Sarah Smith, is outside Trump Tower in New York and joins us for more from New York directly. Sarah, good to see you. We have been looking at New York as everything has been descending on the city of New York in Manhattan there. What is happening where you are?
So within the last few minutes, Donald Trump arrived and went inside Trump Tower with a wave to all the supporters who's gathered outside. It really does feel as though the circus has come back to town, because the pavements around Trump Tower have been absolutely packed with people waiting to see him come back to what used to be his home city. There's been a small demonstration with protesters carrying pro-Trump signs. I spoke to some of them this afternoon, and there's no doubt they are completely convinced that this is a political witch hunt against Donald Trump. They believe what he says about that and think that the district attorney has no evidence but just political malice against Donald Trump. The establishment is frightened of him, was the general sense, but also a conviction that not only will he beat these charges, that it will simply backfire on the people who they think have orchestrated this conspiracy, and that it won't stop him winning the presidency in 2024. Now, these are, of course, die-hard Trump supporters. What really matters is what people, independents, people in the middle of politics, think of this scene. But what's clear is that Donald Trump is relishing being right back in the spotlight, being the centre of attention. He will defiantly go down to the courthouse tomorrow and try to use this court appearance to raise more funds for his political campaign, to raise that campaign's profile, and he thinks boost his chances of winning the presidency.
Sarah, we know that there have been calls for Donald Trump supporters to come to New York to show their support. Also, protesters are expected to arrive there at the court. I mean, how is the city preparing?
Well, there are barricades up in the blocks all around Trump Tower and also in Lower Manhattan all around the criminal court. There's been a really heavy police presence there for days. And of course they know that there is the potential that people may come into the city. The mayor has asked what he called potential rabble-rousers to stay away, saying that the city's not a playground in which they can host their demonstrations. You'll remember a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump on his social media platform, Truth Social, did warn of the potential of death and destruction if charges were brought against him. So that's why there is a heavy security presence, a lot of police around, and of course particular security arrangements surrounding Donald Trump himself. The Secret Service have many more agents on hand to safely escort him in and out of the courthouse, and we know of course that they will go with him after he leaves the court straight back to Mar-a-Lago, where he's going to give a speech to supporters tomorrow night, where I think you can expect a defiant performance.
And Sarah, just briefly, if you could remind us again what exactly that might look like tomorrow. Will we see Donald Trump essentially paraded in front of his supporters, in front of the city?
Well, because he will agree to surrender voluntarily, there will be no handcuffs involved and not a so-called perp walk of him being accompanied by police and led into the courthouse. He'll simply walk in with his lawyers as though he was there to give evidence. At that point, he will be told exactly what the charges are against him, as well as being fingerprinted. There's some debate over whether or not a mugshot will be taken, and in the afternoon, he will appear in front of a judge where we, of course, expect him to plead not guilty.
Our Sarah Smith reporting there from New York. Thank you very much, Sarah. Now, Finland will officially become the 31st member of NATO on Tuesday. The country, which borders Russia, asked to join the military alliance after Moscow invaded Ukraine. Here's what NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg had to say.
This is a historic week. Tomorrow we will welcome Finland as the 31st member of NATO, making Finland safer and our alliance stronger. We will raise the Finnish flag for the first time here at the NATO headquarters.
The announcement comes only a day after a nail-biting election race in Finland in which Prime Minister Sanna Marin lost to the leader of Finland's main center-right party, Petteri Orpo. His National Coalition Party won 20.8% of the vote. The right-wing Populist Finns party came in a close second with a record 20.1% of the vote. It was a bitter defeat for Sanna Marin's party, who trailed with 19.9%. Ms. Marin was credited with steering the country to NATO membership, but Mr. Orpo will now likely take over as the new prime minister. Earlier, I spoke to diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams about Finland's accession to NATO. Paul, thanks for joining us. What does Finland bring to NATO?
Finland brings actually a very well-organized, well-equipped military, small but with huge numbers of reserves, sophisticated Western equipment, including dozens of fifth-generation American fighter jets. So it is a well-equipped military. It has been essentially pretty well integrated with NATO for some time, so it's not going to have any difficulty at all integrating with the Western alliance. And of course, the other thing, which is a kind of geographical fact, is that it has a huge border with Russia, and as a result of Finland joining NATO, Russia's border with the Western alliance has more than doubled. And when you bear in mind that Vladimir Putin, before he launched his all-out invasion of Ukraine last year, said that he wanted to see NATO withdrawing from Eastern Europe and reducing its presence along his frontier, then, as Mr. Stoltenberg, the UN Secretary General, said today, Mr. Putin is getting exactly the opposite.
That is significant indeed. Can you remind us what Russia's response to Finland's accession to NATO has been?
Well, so far it has been, and this has been the consistent message since last year, that it will bolster its own forces in the northwest of Russia. It obviously regards an enhanced NATO presence on its border as an additional threat. Today we heard Russian officials saying that should NATO choose to station personnel and equipment in Finland, as it has done in the Baltic republics, who have been members for much longer, then Russia reserved the right to take what was described as additional measures. We don't know what those are. I think probably Russia knows that this is something that is going to happen, and it's going to wait and see to what extent NATO decides to bolster its presence along that long border. My guess is that for the time being, Finland simply being a member is enough.
Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams, thank you for those insights. And let's return now to our top story, Donald Trump's upcoming arraignment on Tuesday, because we want to hear another voice on this story. And with me now from Chicago is Rodney Davis, a former Republican congressman from the state of Illinois. Mr. Davis, thank you very much for joining us. I want to jump right in and ask you about the criticisms of this case. What we have heard from, in particular, many Republicans is that Alvin Bragg, the district attorney from Manhattan who brought this case, is trying to bring down the former president. How do we actually know that that's the case and it's not the district attorney following the letter of the law?
Well, you have to look at what is the charge. We don't know yet. We're only speculating on this being a supposed election law violation. Well, the Federal Election Commission didn't even proceed with the prosecution when the president was in the White House. The DOJ said this isn't something that would rise to a crime at the federal level to move toward prosecution. Now, DA Bragg, if he is trying to get President Trump to actually account for a federal election crime, that's really out of his jurisdiction. And frankly, if it doesn't bring the president down, if it doesn't hurt him, I think it will only make him stronger in the next election.
But just coming back to that point, couldn't it be that this district attorney has further evidence that could make this case?
Well, there's one thing about American judicial politics and the American political system. There are a lot of leaks. I have yet to hear that there is a solid case beyond what has been speculated. And what is frustrating is most Republicans, like me, we don't want Donald Trump to be the nominee. But there's nobody who plays a victim better than Donald Trump. And he will play the victim to Alvin Bragg, who's not doing much about addressing the ever-increasing crime problem in New York City.
There's been a lot of speculation about what this might mean for the former president's bid to become president again. If you were to be talking to your voters who you used to represent in the state of Illinois, how do you think they would be looking at this case? Do you think that this hurts President Trump's image in their eyes?
I don't. Remember, there are many in the United States that feel President Trump has been attacked since he got elected. And in the end, this is a president who survived 2 impeachments. He survived the Russia collusion allegation that we saw were demonstrably false. I think when he is the victim, he gets stronger. And frankly, that's what scares me the most as a Republican. I think he's the only Republican, the only major candidate that could lose to Joe Biden that we have right now in the field or in the projected field.
But Mr. Davis, just to follow up on that, is Donald Trump here really the victim? He is under investigation in at least 4 serious cases, one of which, of course, is linked to the January 6th riot at the Capitol. So is it fair to call him the victim here?
Well, no, not at all. But he's going to play the victim. He's going to go out and talk to his supporters and talk to many in America who feel that there might be a 2-tiered form of justice that treats Democrats different than Republicans right now in the United States. And he's going to try and utilize that to his political advantage for sure.
How do you see this playing out tomorrow for the president? We're expecting him to speak after he heads to Manhattan. He'll head back to Florida and speak. What kind of messaging do you think we're going to see from the president, especially as he's continuing to campaign to become president again?
Well, it's certainly not going to be a disciplined message. That's one thing that I know about President Trump. He lacks discipline when it comes to any message. He's going to lay out his grievances. He's going to lay out why he feels that he is going to be the victim. And he's going to try and take advantage and put many of my former colleagues under a lot of pressure to step up to the plate and endorse him or not to.
Where do you think Republicans will come down on this? The entire party, the other lawmakers in Congress?
Well, there's not one large party structure that can tell any candidate what to do and what not to do. I think what you'll see over the next few days, you'll start to see whether or not elected Republicans across the country will step up and defend the president, not only defend him against what many of us think are trumped up charges, but will they endorse him in his run for president? And if you start to see an increase in a number of elected Republican officials coming up and endorsing his candidacy, then you're going to start to see that the polling has changed in his favor from where it was just a few days ago.
Former Republican Congressman Rodney Davis in the state of Illinois, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on our show.
Thank you.
Let's turn to Russia now, where investigators have detained a 26-year-old woman over the death of a pro-Kremlin blogger. Vladimir Tatarsky was killed in a bomb attack yesterday, and police say the woman they apprehended, Daria Trepova, had previously been arrested for protesting against the war in Ukraine. Russia's anti-terrorism committee has blamed the bombing on the Ukrainian secret services, who deny involvement. This report from our security correspondent Frank Gardner contains some distressing images.
An ordinary scene on an ordinary street in St. Petersburg. A woman enters a cafe carrying a box containing a statuette. It's hard to verify this, but Russia says she was delivering a bomb. Inside the cafe, there's a meeting of Russian pro-war activists. The invited speaker is this man, Vladimir Tatarsky, a prolific blogger with over 500,000 followers. And then this. The explosion killed him outright and injured over 30 others. Russian officials were quick to blame Ukraine, which denied it. But the suspect now detained is not Ukrainian, she's Russian. Police are naming her as Daria Trepova, an anti-war activist. They've released this footage of her being arrested at home. She's then seen being questioned, apparently under duress. Russia says she's confessed to carrying the statuette that killed Tatarsky in the cafe. He was a big figure amongst Russian military bloggers, a former convict He fought against Ukraine in the Donbass. He was highly critical of Russian failures on the battlefield, leading some to suspect inter-Russian rivalry. Well, this is a really murky incident. Despite all the claims and counterclaims, it's not immediately clear exactly who was behind this explosion. But to help guide us through it is Olga Ivshina from the BBC Russian service. Olga, what is your take on this explosion?
Russian war supporters and many other experts believe it must be Ukrainian intelligence behind this attack. Russian investigative committee thinks that Russian opposition was also involved. We need to remember that in last year, another prominent vocal supporter of war was targeted in Moscow. On the other hand, many Russian war commanders were killed in strange circumstances since 2014.
As Russian investigators pieced together what happened yesterday in St. Petersburg, the propaganda war continues. Russia says this was Ukraine-linked terrorism. Ukraine's presidential advisor says it was Russian on Russian. Spiders, he tweeted, are eating each other in a jar. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Global oil prices jumped on Monday after OPEC Plus nations announced a surprise cut in production. The group plans to trim output by more than 1 million barrels per day. That announcement raised concerns over tightening supplies. The Biden administration says it was given a heads up ahead of the decision and that it disagrees with the cuts. NASA has revealed the 4 astronauts who will help take humanity back to the moon for the first time since 1973.
Ladies and gentlemen, your Artemis II crew.
Among them are the first woman and the first black man to take part in a moon mission. Artemis II, as it's called, will launch late next year or early in 2025. The 3 Americans and 1 Canadian won't actually land on the lunar surface, but they'll fly in a capsule around the moon. The mission sets the stage for a touchdown by a later crew. And before we go, an anniversary from a simpler time in the world of technology. 50 years ago, on April 3rd, 1973, the world's first mobile phone call was made from a street corner in New York. An American engineer made the call to taunt a rival that his invention was a success. The phone was about 4 times the weight of a modern iPhone 14. It had no screen, no camera, and no messaging functions. The phone also took 10 hours to charge, providing only half an hour of talk time. I'm Sumi Somaskanda. Thank you for watching World News America. Please stay with us and do head to our website for more information. Thanks for watching.
Funding for presentation of this program is provided by
Financial services firm Raymond James.
BDO, accountants and advisors.
Funding was also provided by the Freeman Foundation, by Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, pursuing solutions for America's neglected needs, and by contributions to this PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.
Power line's down. Let's go.
If you see a power line laying on the ground,
Or it's hanging or drooping or swinging around.
don't touch, not even a finger.
Call 911 when the lines are down.
On episode 1 of La Frontera, the US-Mexico border has the most crossings of anywhere in the world. And on this episode, I'm going to the busiest place on the map, California and Baja California, where binational collaborations and the blending of cultures is an opportunity for explosive creativity and growth.
Good job. Yay!
Tonight at 8.
When actor Richard E. Grant follows the footsteps of great authors,
I travel not to go anywhere, but to go.
he discovers what inspired his favorite novels.
Catapulted back into the past.
The stunning places, cultures, and cuisines
Delicious.
behind these famous books.
Trying to reimagine what life was like here, whilst knowing that you're walking amongst the dead.
Right around the world. Tonight at 9. Meetings of the Board of Directors and its operating committees are open to the public. Please visit kera.org/about for the meeting schedule.
One of the things I love most about KERA is that there's something for everyone. Our audience shares curiosity and a sense of civic engagement and a deep desire to learn about other people's experiences. And we serve a lot of different parts of the community, and there's truly something for everyone in what we do. We reach into homes and provide companionship for people as they age in place. I think there's so many different ways that we touch people. There'd be a huge hole in the community without KERA.
On American Experience.
Maria Telkish was a solar evangelist.
She really imagined this as revolutionizing the way that people lived.
She's laying foundation for pretty much everything that we do with solar.
The Sun Queen on American Experience.
Tuesday at 8. The Goddard School believes that every child deserves to learn in a warm and welcoming classroom, where discovery and learning can occur naturally, because they believe that some of the most profound lessons happen during everyday moments.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, former President Donald Trump travels to New York ahead of his Tuesday arraignment in a hush money case as his other legal troubles simmer.
A pro-Russian blogger who was outspoken in his hostility towards Ukraine is assassinated in a St. Petersburg cafe.
And Wisconsin voters prepare to decide the balance of power of the state Supreme Court in a sharply divided election with national implications.
In the last decade or so, Wisconsin has felt like it is the ground zero for a lot of the issues that we have in American politics.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
Actually, you don't need vision to do most things in life. It's exciting to be part of a team driving the technology forward. I think that's the most rewarding thing. People who know BDO.
the Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. Supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. In what will be an historic 24 hours, former President Donald Trump has returned to New York City ahead of his first appearance in a Manhattan courtroom tomorrow.
Mr. Trump has been indicted on multiple charges connected to hush money payments he allegedly made ahead of the 2016 election. To shed light on what comes next, I'm joined here with our White House correspondent, Laura Barone-Lopez. Laura, good to see you.
Good to be here.
It is historic. It is unprecedented. The first former president in the U.S. to be indicted. But what do we expect to see tomorrow?
So tonight he'll be staying at Trump Tower, as we know, and then tomorrow when he heads to the courthouse, he is going to be booked, fingerprinted. We don't know if there is going to be a mugshot. There is a possibility there. And then immediately after that, rather than being held in a cell, which is typical for someone being indicted and going to the courthouse, he will then be transported to the courtroom, and then the indictment will be unsealed, and the charges will be read to him and everyone in the courtroom. Now, what we don't know is if media outlets are going to get access to that courtroom as it's going on, and if not, then what we can expect is for the indictment to be made public once the former president is in that courtroom.
And we know Mr. Trump has previously called on his supporters to protest if he were to be indicted. Do we expect any of that to happen tomorrow at his arraignment?
We are expecting some protests because Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, a self-described Christian nationalist who has also downplayed the violence of the January 6th insurrection, called on her followers to join her across from the courthouse to protest this indictment and support the former president. Now, New York City Mayor Eric Adams had this warning today for Greene.
And although we have no specific threats, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is known to spread misinformation and hate speech, she stated she's coming to town. While you're in town, be on your best behavior.
Now, in addition to that, the New York Police Department, the commissioner for the police department, said that right now there are no credible or specific threats to the city, but that they are on alert and that they are working with national and local law enforcement. And in addition to that, tomorrow we're expecting the former President Trump to then return to Mar-a-Lago and give some remarks after he's arraigned.
Laura, we should be specific and clear here. This is one investigation into former President Trump. There are other ongoing investigations that could come with charges of their own. Remind us the details of those.
So in addition to this investigation, well, first, actually, let's count this investigation. So the Manhattan District Attorney's investigation into hush money payments that were allegedly made to adult film star Stormy Daniels. There's also a Fulton County investigation in Georgia into election interference in 2020. The Department of Justice Special Counsel is investigating the January 6th insurrection and the former president's potential efforts to overturn the 2020 election there. And then again, also the special counsel in the Justice Department is investigating the classified documents that were found at Mar-a-Lago. Now, we should note that the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post reported that the Justice Department has found more evidence of possible obstruction by Trump. And what we're talking about there is actions that the former president took to potentially block the return of these classified documents. Now, another thing we're also watching in regards to the Manhattan District Attorney's hush money payments investigation is when we see the charges tomorrow, whether or not the Manhattan DA is just going to be solely focused on the payments made to Stormy Daniels or also to Playboy model Karen McDougal.
Things we're going to be waiting and seeing. A lot we don't yet know. We're going to watch and report as we do. Laura Barone-Lopez, thank you.
Thank you.
In the day's other headlines, the death toll has reached at least 32 in an onslaught of tornadoes that struck the South, Midwest, and the Mid-Atlantic over the weekend. Aerials from Little Rock, Arkansas show the wide extent of the damage from a Friday night storm. Tornadoes destroyed homes and businesses in 11 states as far east as Delaware. Pentagon officials say they're still analyzing whether a Chinese spy balloon sent intelligence back to Beijing in early February. Reports today said the balloon made repeated passes over military sites on the U.S. mainland and transmitted data in real time. A Pentagon official did not directly confirm or deny the accounts.
I think what we said at the very beginning was still holds true to today. As soon as we realized that they were collecting intelligence and hovering over our sensitive sites, we took measures and put into place measures that limited the additive value that the balloon could collect on.
The balloon was eventually shot down off the U.S. Atlantic coast. The FBI is examining sensors recovered from the wreckage. Workers at the passport office in Britain launched a 5-week strike today, demanding better pay amid surging inflation. About 1,000 people walked off the job as travelers prepare for the busy summer travel season. It's the latest in a string of public sector strikes across the UK. In Paris, the wheels have come off a popular transit option. Parisians voted overwhelmingly on Sunday to ban rented e-scooters. Commuters and tourists have been able to pick up the scooters and drop them off anywhere. But city officials say they've become a nuisance and have caused hundreds of accidents. Back in this country, NASA named the 4 astronauts slated to fly around the moon sometime next year. The Artemis II crew includes the first woman and the first person of color to go on a lunar mission. The 3 Americans and 1 Canadian were introduced to the public today in Houston. Their mission will be NASA's first crewed voyage to the moon in more than 50 years.
We need to celebrate this moment in human history, because Artemis II is more than a mission to the moon and back. It's more than a mission that has to happen before we send people to the surface of the moon. It is the next step on the journey that gets humanity to Mars.
President Biden called the 4 crew members on Sunday and thanked them for their service. The Artemis program aims to land them on the lunar surface as early as 2025. A potentially groundbreaking lawsuit is going forward against a college campus shutdown during the pandemic. A federal judge has now ruled that a student suit against the University of Delaware will be a class action. More than 17,000 undergraduates were enrolled at the school when in-person classes were halted 3 years ago. The students want partial refunds of tuition. The price of oil spiked 5.5% today after Saudi Arabia and other producers announced plans to scale back output. They say the cut of more than 1 million barrels a day will start in May. White House officials say they oppose the move and made that clear to the Saudis. On Wall Street, those higher oil prices boosted energy stocks and offset losses in tech shares. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 327 points, or 1%, to close at 33,601. The Nasdaq fell 32 points. The S&P 500 added 15. And Louisiana State University celebrated today after winning its first NCAA women's basketball championship. The Tigers and their coach, Kim Mulkey, claimed the title Sunday in Dallas, beating Iowa 102-85. Angel Reese was named the most outstanding player. And still to come on the PBS NewsHour, Chicago sees record early voter turnout ahead of a contentious runoff election for mayor. The former president of Iraq reflects on the U.S. invasion some 20 years later. A new exhibit by artist Kahindi Wiley focuses on grief and asks whose lives have value.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
It's the highest profile killing of a supporter of Russia's war in Ukraine. This weekend, a pro-war blogger died in an explosion at a cafe in St. Petersburg. Russian authorities blamed Ukraine and have arrested an anti-war activist. But as Nick Schifrin reports, the cafe's owner, a well-known Putin ally, says the plot is thicker.
In front of his own photo, Vladimir Tatarsky accepted his Trojan horse, a bust of himself. Moments after this was filmed, the bust exploded and destroyed the cafe, leaving his dead body in a mangled mess. Tatarsky was a well-known blogger and advocate for Russia's war in Ukraine. He was actually Ukrainian-born, a furniture maker turned convicted bank robber turned ultra-nationalist influencer who's shown off the Kremlin to his 560,000 followers.
We will defeat everyone. We will kill everyone. We will rob everyone we need. Everything will be as we like.
Russia blamed this woman, anti-war activist Daria Trepova, who brought the bust to the cafe in video posted by a Russian news outlet. Russian authorities accused her of acting on behalf of Ukrainian intelligence. But the cafe's owner begs to differ. Yevgeny Prigozhin was once known as Putin's chef, who owned a catering service that catered to the Kremlin. But he's emerged from the shadows to help fund and fuel the war as the chief financer of the Wagner paramilitary group. He personally recruited tens of thousands of soldiers, many from Russian prisons, and sent them into hell. Bakhmut once had a population of 75,000. Today, Russia has destroyed it and calls it victory. Wagner has led the fighting and dying. Prigozhin posted this photo. The U.S. says more than 30,000 Wagner soldiers have been wounded or killed. Last night, Prigozhin claimed Wagner had seized Bakhmut's center. The flag says, to the memory of Vladlen Tatarsky. Prigozhin, like Tatarsky, is a pardoned former convict who became a prominent ultra-nationalist. And Prigozhin had given his cafe to Tatarsky's group. But today, Prigozhin posted an audio message saying the explosion was not caused by Ukraine's government.
I would not blame the Kiev regime for these actions. I think there is a group of radicals who hardly have any connections to the government.
Some Russian government officials claim the woman arrested in Tatarsky's death worked with Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny's organization. He is currently in Russian prison, and neither Navalny nor his group have had any connection to any violence in Russia. To explore the implications of this bombing, we turn to Candace Rondeau, a senior director at New America, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank. She's written extensively about the Wagner Group and its leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Candace Rondeau, welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you very much. Tell us more about who Tatarsky was and why his death is so significant.
Vladlen Tatarsky was probably one of the most prolific military bloggers, pro-Russian military bloggers on the social media channels that are popular with Russian speakers. He had a huge following. Sometime around 2017, 2018, he became very popular for starting a social media vertical called Reverse Side of the Medal, which is basically a mouthpiece and kind of a soapbox for some of the most extreme ultranationalist elements of Russia's right wing. And in particular, Reverse Side of the Medal is a kind of cultural hub for the Wagner Group and Russian mercenaries and soldiers of fortune.
And so fast forward to the full-scale invasion. He is one of the most prominent bloggers, not only advocating for the war, but in fact pushing the military and the government for more war.
The one thing to understand about Tatarsky and Reverse Side of the Medal is that job number one was to stoke passion for war. Job number two was to make sure that that passion could be converted into the mobilization of forces on the sly, on the stealth. And he succeeded in doing that by kind of selling the Wagner Group brand. Stealthy, shadowy, high-risk, covert operators, masked men, doing daring things in Donbass. And he did that very well by actually cultivating relationships with real-world Wagner Group fighters and bringing them onto his YouTube channel, doing short videos and Telegram. And he basically grew the brand through that social media channel. But also, in St. Petersburg, he was kind of becoming like a cafe influencer. That's why the street food #1 restaurant was hit. Essentially, Yevgeny Prigozhin had given it to Tatarsky as kind of like a headquarters for this cultural move of ultra-nationalist pro-war sentiment to be mobilized, not just on the media channels, but also in real life.
And this wasn't only, as you've pointed out, Prigozhin's cafe. This was a neighborhood seen as Prigozhin's turf. How much of this is about sending a message, as far as we can tell, to Prigozhin himself?
That restaurant is just 5 blocks, not even 3 blocks from Yevgeny Prigozhin's very first high-style restaurant. It's called the Old Customs House. I mean, it was a big mafia hangout, a big hangout for Vladimir Putin back in the day when he was deputy mayor in St. Petersburg. That whole block, that whole little area where this bombing occurred has been basically Yevgeny Prigozhin's playground and turf and headquarters for the better part of 30 years now. And so striking there really sends a message not just to Prigozhin, but to all the people who are sort of involved in his business enterprises that they better stay on watch.
You point out how long Prigozhin goes back with Putin, but more recently he's been fighting with some of the senior Russian defense officials. Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister, the equivalent of their chief of staff, Valery Gerasimov, he's accused both of them of actually killing Wagner soldiers in Ukraine. And there's yet again today another gap between what Prigozhin is saying and the Kremlin talking points. What's behind that divide?
It's very hard with Yevgeny Prigozhin to discern how much is theater and then how much is real. But it has been clear over the last, I'd say, 9 months or so, since the Battle of Bakhmut began in Ukraine, that he finds himself at the front lines of basically a meat grinder. And there's been a lot of complaints about sort of shell hunger, that is to say, not enough ammunition, not enough shells to go around for the artillery that's required to beat back the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Bakhmut. And he's become increasingly louder and louder. And he's had the backing of hundreds of thousands of followers on channels like the one that Vladimir Tatarsky used to run. And so that's kind of given him a sort of sense of confidence. He's biting the hand that feeds him, basically. At the same time, he also seems to have a political strategy, one in which he understands that the minute the Battle of Bakhmut falls one way or the other, his utility politically and militarily is vastly diminished. And so in a way, the peacocking that you see online, the constant sort of, stream of invective towards Shoigu, as well as Gerasimov, all of that is also part of a larger design to insulate himself from the potential that he becomes expendable. But I think that this message today, with the bombing of Tatarsky, seems to say, indeed you are expendable, Mr. Prigozhin, and you'd better be on watch.
Candace Rondeau, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tomorrow, voters in Wisconsin will decide the balance of the state Supreme Court in the most expensive judicial election in history. Judy Woodruff recently traveled to Wisconsin to see how the state's sharp political divides are shaping what could be the most important election of 2023. It's part of her series, America at a Crossroads.
After a long winter, small signs of spring in the upper Midwest. But as Wisconsin thaws, the bitter winds of politics are again sweeping the Badger State. This time around, though, the race isn't for Congress, governor, or the presidency. It's for the state Supreme Court.
This election is officially nonpartisan. Neither of the candidates will have a D or an R next to their names on the ballot. But given the deep divide here and the fact that the state Supreme Court will play a role in deciding the future of everything from abortion to redistricting to election laws in Wisconsin, voter interest is high and politics has been infused from the start.
We cannot take our foot off the pedal for a second.
The election pits liberal Milwaukee County Judge Janet Protasewicz
Janet Protasewicz is a threat to our liberties.
against conservative Daniel Kelly, a former state Supreme Court justice who lost re-election in 2020.
The Wisconsin Supreme Court has reconvened.
Tomorrow's winner could cast the tie-breaking vote on an evenly split court.
Hello there, I'm Judy Woodruff.
So I wanted to hear from voters in this sharply divided state at a time of growing partisanship, not just here, but in courts across the country.
We've never seen anything quite like this. Look,
Charlie Sykes is a longtime political commentator in Wisconsin. Once a conservative talk show host, he founded the center-right news and opinion site, The Bulwark.
Good morning and welcome to the Bulwark podcast. I think that in the last decade or so, Wisconsin has felt like it is the ground zero for a lot of the issues that we have in American politics, and maybe the polarization that we see nationally was foreshadowed here in Wisconsin.
It's really scary because there's so much on the line.
25-year-old Sydney Lee has lived in Milwaukee her whole life. She's been canvassing and making calls in support of Protasewicz.
We have a lot of issues that are becoming partisan, but really they're human issues, and human issues should never be a partisan thing. Because it is so polarizing, we need somebody who's equitable, and Janet is equitable.
Among those human issues, Lee says, are LGBTQ and abortion rights, especially after the U.S. Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade last year.
I'm a Black queer woman, and I want to make sure that I can marry who I want to marry one day. I want to make sure that if I need to have an abortion or if I need a medical procedure, that I shouldn't need clearance for it to do something that's for my choice of my body. Like, I should be able to make decisions for myself.
What does your future look like if Justice Kelly is the winner?
It looks like me moving.
While Protasewicz hasn't declared how she'd rule if Wisconsin's 1849 ban on abortion made its way to the state's high court, she has been clear on what she calls her values.
That should be the woman's right to make the reproductive health decision, period. If my opponent is elected, I can tell you with 100% certainty that 1849 abortion ban will stay on the books.
Kelly has downplayed his own past statements opposing abortion and the endorsements he's received from anti-abortion groups. Instead, he criticizes his opponent for openly discussing her views.
See, this is the problem that you have when you have a candidate who does nothing but talk about her personal politics.
Judges who put their own agendas above the law.
Kelly and his supporters have also tried to paint Protasewicz as weak on crime for sentences she handed down as a judge in Milwaukee County.
A long history of letting dangerous criminals back into our streets.
Directly undermining the work of our officers and putting your family at risk.
That charge, which Protasewicz disputes, has influenced retired Milwaukee police officer Gary Post to vote for Kelly.
Definitely there should be leniency. However, what I've seen far too much is violent persons who are living a lifestyle over many, many years and sometimes decades of violence, and that has to be addressed.
Bottom line, Post says he believes Protasewicz is too progressive.
Our country is going into such a liberal pathway that it's almost gone too far. And I think Janet Protasewicz is more of a liberal, steering it still in that direction.
Remember this?
But Protasewicz has called Dan Kelly extreme, criticizing his work for the Republican Party and his role in a fake electors scheme after President Trump lost Wisconsin in 2020.
Kelly advised Trump operatives as special counsel to overturn the will of the people.
Janet upholds the Constitution.
The race has already drawn record-breaking millions in ad spending.
I'll always protect the rule of law.
This is one of those cases where the hype is not overstated, because here in Wisconsin, everything is at stake. We now have extreme partisanship, but we also have gridlock between a legislature dominated by Republicans and a Democratic governor. Nothing is going to happen, nothing's going to change, so everything shifts to the Supreme Court. And no one's making any pretense that this is anything other than partisan. And so it's going to be hard to go back to we ought to elect judges based on their credentials or their judicial temperament. That era seems to have been beaten to death with hammers.
Charlie Sykes traces much of the polarization in Wisconsin back over a decade to then Governor Scott Walker's Act 10, a measure that, among other things, effectively ended collective bargaining for the state's public employees. It sparked months of intense protests at the state capitol and exposed divisions still seen today.
One of the things that, as I look back on it, at a certain point, our politics becomes about the fight becomes about the fight. It becomes about us versus them. The actual policy matters less than beating the other guy.
90 days to win elections.
In the years since Act 10, Wisconsin's statewide elections have flipped back and forth, many by razor-thin margins.
Donald Trump will carry the state of Wisconsin.
And in 2016, Donald Trump defied the polls to win the state by less than 25,000 votes, a victory that was key to handing him the presidency.
We thought the Republican Party in Wisconsin was people like Paul Ryan. It was people like Reince Priebus. It was not people from the MAGA world. However, as we've seen, as soon as Donald Trump nailed down the nomination, the centrifugal forces, the gravitational pull of partisan loyalties was very, very intense. And that took a lot of us by surprise. But in retrospect, you look back and you see that these divisions, this sense of us versus them, was a pre-existing condition here that Trump was able to exploit and take advantage of.
In 2020, fortunes shifted. President Biden narrowly won Wisconsin, but an attempt by President Trump to overturn the election results reached the state's Supreme Court, which rejected the lawsuit by just one vote. 37-year-old Green Bay resident John McKinney grew up in a conservative household and long considered himself a Republican. But McKinney, who volunteers at this boat shop teaching craftsmanship skills to kids, says that changed with the 2016 election.
As soon as Donald Trump became president, the party was foreign to me. They're too focused on power, seats, taking over, controlling the various levers of government, and they don't really care about, kind of the foundations of what their ideology is.
So when it comes to the state Supreme Court race,
there's other races on the ballot that I'll be voting for, but after kind of reading about the two candidates, I don't feel like I can vote for either of them. It builds kind of community.
McKinney says he's seen politics in Wisconsin become more tribal. He's concerned about the lack of any substantive conversations around policy differences, which has led to the atmosphere surrounding tomorrow's election.
I'm absolutely disgusted by it. Supreme Court justices, I look at as kind of the last line of defense. Lawmakers make laws, judges make sure that those laws are legal, they abide by our Constitution, and in this race, it's a circus.
If it wasn't important, would political leaders go to such great lengths to try to secure their preferred candidates onto courts? And I think the answer is no.
Harvard professor Maya Sen researches American law and politics. Her 2020 book, The Judicial Tug of War, explored how politicians and ideology have shaped the U.S. court system. In the 1980s, Sen says, politicians began to realize the importance of courts in achieving policy goals, particularly with the rise of the anti-abortion movement. That trend continued in the decades that followed, highlighted by the Supreme Court's decision in Bush v. Gore.
After that point, every nomination onto something like the U.S. Supreme Court rose dramatically in importance. So it's really been over the last, 20, 25 years where we've had this partisan climate, and that's just increased over time.
For example, Sen's research has shown that federal judges appointed by President Trump are more conservative than those named by President George W. Bush. And as in Wisconsin, with polarization comes a heightened role for the courts.
As the other branches of power, the Congress and the presidency, as they become increasingly gridlocked because of partisan conflict, that leaves the courts as being particularly important for things that many Americans care about, like abortion and gun rights and civil rights and religious liberties.
In fact, a poll from the nonpartisan Pew Research Center found that after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, Americans' view of the High Court hit its lowest favorability rating in years, and the partisan divide in those views grew wider than at any point in decades.
People are very deferential to courts. They will follow court rulings, but the more that they perceive the courts as being driven by politics and not by law, the more skeptical they'll be of the court's legitimacy. And so the natural extension of that is that they might be more skeptical of the rulings themselves, and they might be less inclined to follow them.
Some of that skepticism is already weighing on Wisconsin voters like John McKinney in Green Bay.
You always want to think the person elected is doing what they believe is right, but there'll always be a question of, was it, the special interest money that was donated? Are they returning a favor?
Charlie Sykes sees this moment as particularly painful for his home state.
Wisconsin had a long tradition of being a laboratory of democracy. And now to see us falling into this hole, it's disturbing because it feels as if dysfunction is the new normal and no one knows where it's going. Here in Wisconsin, these are decent people. People who actually care about their neighbors. And so you just have to have a confidence in the underlying decency of people, becoming disgusted with what's happening with our politics, but I'm not sure we're there yet.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Judy Woodruff in Milwaukee.
Chicago voters head to the polls tomorrow for a final chance to cast ballots in that city's mayor's race. County Commissioner Brandon Johnson is facing off against former Chicago Public Schools CEO Paul Vallis. Both of them beat a crowded field of 9 candidates, including incumbent Mayor Lori Lightfoot. The two candidates offer a stark choice for voters as they weigh issues such as crime, public safety, and education. Following all of this closely is WTTW Chicago PBS reporter Heather Sharon. Heather, thanks for being with us. So we've got Brandon Johnson, this progressive Cook County commissioner, running against the moderate former Chicago Public Schools chief, Paul Vallas. Help us understand how this race in many ways illustrates the broader divides within the Democratic Party.
Well, you have somebody like Brandon Johnson who really comes out of the movement launched by Senator Bernie Sanders to be a more progressive alternative in the national Democratic Party. Brandon Johnson has really picked up that mantle, while Paul Vallas got his start under former Mayor Richard M. Daley and is really looking to draw support from people who remember his work, as you said, as head of the Chicago Public Schools, but also somebody who's vowing to be tough on crime. As you know, Chicago, along with most major cities, has yet to sort of see a return to the crime and public safety levels that existed before the pandemic. And both Paul Vallas and Brandon Johnson are offering two very different solutions.
Well, let's talk more about that, because as you point out, crime was a major issue in the first mayoral election back in February. What issues are driving or animating this runoff race?
Well, Paul Vallas says that the biggest issue is the need to get more Chicago police officers on the city's streets, and he has vowed to do that as quickly and efficiently as possible. But Brandon Johnson sees what ails Chicago as sort of a more complicated problem and is promising a more holistic approach by funding anti-violence efforts, reopening public mental health clinics that have been closed for more than a decade in Chicago, and embracing a policy known in Chicago as treatment, not trauma, which really seeks to put the onus on preventing crime as opposed to sort of enforcing the law and responding to it afterwards. The choice facing Chicago voters is really, really clear, and I think that's part of the reason why it is the closest mayoral contest in 40 years. Not since 1983 have we seen a mayoral contest go down to the wire like this.
We also know from following your reporting that there is a racial dynamic at play here, too. How is that evident in this runoff?
Well, it's a cliche to say that the only issue in Chicago politics is race, but there's a germ of truth in that as well. Paul Vallas was the only white candidate to run to unseat Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who was the first gay and the first black woman to be elected Chicago mayor. Brandon Johnson is black, and he is hoping that he will win the wards on the south and the west side that voted to put Lightfoot in first place in the first round of voting. He hopes that combining those votes with progressive votes from progressive Latino and white voters will be enough to get him over 50%, whereas Paul Vallas is really hoping to capitalize on people in the black community who do want to see more police officers on their street, because of course we know that those neighborhoods are among the most violent in Chicago. But again, two very different approaches, exacerbated by the fact that this whole sort of race has sort of pitted a white man against a black man, really for the first time again since 1983.
Heather, what, if anything, will the outcome of this race tell us about what Democrats are seeking in terms of leadership?
Well, whatever the result is, it will be used as sort of one of the first examples of what could happen in the 2024 elections. If Brandon Johnson wins, you're going to see progressive politicians like Bernie Sanders say, this is the way progressive candidates can win in a time of high crime and backlash from more conservative voters, not just those in the Republican Party, but also those in the Democratic Party. If Paul Vallas wins, you will see people say that Joe Biden, if he's going to run for re-election and then win a second term, will have to sort of take a more moderate approach to not only issues of policing and crime, but also sort of the so-called culture war issues to tack to a more middle ground position. Neither of those takes, I think, will be exactly right, because Chicago is an idiosyncratic city that, sort of has its own issues. But that, I think, is how it will be read nationally, even though there are, of course, other issues besides crime and violence, even though that's dominated, motivating people to go to the polls tomorrow.
Heather Sharon with WTTW Chicago PBS. Heather, thanks so much.
Thanks very much.
This coming Sunday will mark 20 years since American troops captured Baghdad after a swift and seemingly conclusive victory over Iraqi forces. But that victory was a mirage. Years of blood and terror remained for both Iraq and the U.S. before the establishment of a fragile democracy. Now, special correspondent Simona Foltine speaks with a leader within that democracy over these decades for his views 20 years later.
At his residence in Iraqi Kurdistan, we meet Dr. Barham Saleh. The Kurdish veteran politician served as Iraq's president from 2018 until 2022. It was a tense period that shook the foundations of Iraq's post-2003 political order. Large-scale anti-government protests called for sweeping reforms. At the same time, the country risked turning into a battleground between U.S. forces and Iran-aligned actors as the two sides attacked each other on Iraqi soil. I sat down with Saleh to discuss the legacy of the U.S. invasion, the state of Iraq's democracy today, and the country's importance for regional stability.
Dr. Barham Saleh, thank you for speaking to the PBS NewsHour.
Thank you for having me.
20 years have passed since the United States invaded Iraq based on false intelligence, but it did remove a brutal dictatorship. From the Iraqi perspective today, was it the right thing to do?
For us, the issue was getting rid of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was a brutal dictator, a tyranny that has really gripped this country, committed genocide against its own people, used chemical weapons and weapons of mass destruction to exterminate the Kurds. Many other Iraqis in southern Iraq and elsewhere have been committed to mass graves. A regime that has committed wars of aggression, a country that was under sanctions. For us, war was not the best option. We would have rather done it ourselves. We would have rather been able to topple Saddam Hussein using our own means. So for us, the American-led intervention meant a great opportunity to get rid of this regime and allow the polity of Iraq to move on and hopefully develop a functioning democracy in the heart of the Islamic Middle East. If you ask me and ask other Iraqis, and no doubt outsiders, well, we will all have to acknowledge this has not been achieved the way we hoped to.
One of the main challenges Iraq faces today is rampant corruption.
Yes.
Would you say this is a direct result of the political order the United States helped install? And to what extent do you think the United States bears the responsibility versus the Iraqi elite?
I definitely agree with you that corruption is truly a problem. Many mistakes happened in the process for administering Iraq's transition, of which the Americans can speak to their responsibility. But certainly from our side, the idea of elections early on, and with a weak state, abundant resources, primarily revenues coming from oil and other resources that were easily accessed, has made corruption far more rampant. And today, if you ask me of what is the number one priority for Iraq, for it to survive, for it to be able to move forward, is to really tackle this issue of chronic corruption, which has become the political economy of the country. Corruption allows armed groups, outlaw groups to be sustained, allows extremism to be sustained, allows conflict to be sustained. But the scale of the problem is very huge, partly because there is a lot of international complicity allowing stolen assets to end up in the banking sectors of many countries. So we need to get together to really take this on.
Many Iraqis today, including young people who never lived under Saddam, are once again yearning for a strong man. Mm-hmm. It shows to some extent a disillusionment with this young democracy. Does that worry you?
Look, we have to acknowledge in 2003, when Saddam Hussein was overthrown, the expectation, the hope, the wish was to see a functioning democracy that at the end will put Iraq at peace with itself and at peace with its neighbors. And I'm not one of those who say everything was bad, but also let us look at the context of things. We have had changes of government 6 times, 6 prime ministers,
4 presidents have moved, and we're talking about the heart of the Islamic Middle East. And what we saw in the protest movement in 2019, when young Iraqis from all regions of Iraq came out to the street demanding a change, demanding their homeland back. That was quite a profound statement about the liveliness of the society and the...
But they failed.
Let me tell you something. They changed the government, they changed the elections law, and I'm not saying that the protest movement delivered, no, but this is a polity that is happening back and forth. There is a huge struggle. The struggle over Iraq domestically matters. It's amazing consequence for every community of this country. It's of amazing consequence to the entire neighborhood.
Saddam was a brutal dictator, but he was to some extent also a bulwark against external influence. And today Iraq has become a battlefield of sorts for regional interests. You have dozens of Turkish bases here in Iraqi Kurdistan. You had just a few months ago the Iranian government shelling opposition groups. And of course we all remember when the United States assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani as well as an Iraqi leader on Iraqi soil. So what can be done to strengthen Iraq's sovereignty?
I will tell you something. I challenge the premise of your question. Saddam Hussein is the person, the leader who enabled foreign intervention in Iraq. The agreement with the Turks by which the Turks are allowed to come inside Iraq was done under Saddam Hussein. By the fact that he committed the crimes he committed against the Kurds were reliant on Iranian support and Syrian support and outside support in order to survive. The same with Shia opposition groups. So basically, seriously, this notion that he was a bulwark...
But you would agree there is more intervention in Iraq today than there was back then?
But by the way, I'm not saying there are no regional and international intervention. Of course there is. And it's quite clear. Nobody can deny this. Turkish bases are too many in this country. Yes, Iranian presence inside Iraq and its influence is real. But I think you will be seeing more and more assertion of Iraqi sovereignty. And I say to our neighbors, all our neighbors, including the Arabs, including the Iranians and the Turks, if they want Iraq to be viable and not a threat to you, state-to-state relations, a sovereign state to a state, because otherwise, if you get too involved, this is a precursor for the intervention of others. And this quagmire of Iraq, from their perspective, nobody gets out of it free.
U.S. policy on the Middle East is very much centered around Iran and American desire to reduce Iranian influence in the region. Do you sometimes feel that Iraq is caught in the middle and that its interests are drowned out in this geopolitical conflict?
Iraq is definitely caught in the middle. Iraq is very much a key area for regional balances and dynamics, has always been, will always remain, is of consequence to everybody. This place where everybody has viewed as a threat and that they had to dominate in order to prevent the others from dominating, let it turn it into a bridge. We need partnership with the United States. Iraq will always need good relations with its neighbors and certainly with Iran. But at the end of the day, a state-to-state relationship, because otherwise, if any regional actor dominates, the others will be getting in, and this, instead of being an opportunity for all, it becomes a quagmire for all. This has been the history of the country.
Dr. Barham Saleh, thank you very much for speaking to the PBS NewsHour.
Thank you, Simona.
Kehinde Wiley is best known for his distinctive portrait of Barack Obama, becoming the first black artist to paint a presidential portrait. But Wiley has spent most of his career painting vibrant portrayals of everyday African-American men and women. A new exhibition of his work focuses on grief and mourning, and also asks whose lives have value. Jeffrey Brown traveled to San Francisco for our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
A monumental painting 25 feet long. A young black man, limbs twisted, lying amid a colorful floral field. A contemporary image of grief and death that also evokes the history of image making itself. Artist Kehinde Wiley.
There's a tradition, and I love the tradition of painting that comes from Western Europe. I've spent much of my life learning it and trying to master it. And in a lot of that stuff, I see sadness, but I also see dignity and respect. I see people looking at the life of Christ or the life of a fallen soldier and valuing their lives so much to make really great, beautiful works of art out of it. I wanted to use that language and turn it towards people who look like me.
The exhibition, An Archaeology of Silence, at San Francisco's De Young Museum, dramatic in its scale and lighting, presents paintings and sculptures, 25 works in all, that use the iconography of art history to expose violence against black men and women today. In ancient sculpture, the Dying Gaul from 200 BC. Now a young man in a hoodie taking his last breaths. The Virgin Martyr St. Cecilia, a 1610 Italian marble sculpture, now transformed by Wiley into a large painting of a contemporary woman. The pain, but also the passion and power, so often captured in the history of Western religious art and portraiture.
I'm telling a story about a group of people who for centuries have been ignored and forgotten. And I'm using the language of the epic, the heroic, even the elegiac, the sort of sadness that surrounds a lot of these big monuments, to be able to make someone feel special again, to make someone feel fully formed, mourned after. I don't know, is it a sad show, or is there something here that says that there's a bit of growth and a bit of light in the midst of all of this sadness?
Well, I wonder myself, what do you see? You're the creator here.
That's right, that's right. I mean, I guess what I'm doing is I'm creating a provocation.
Today, one of the world's most celebrated artists, in part for his 2018 portrait of Barack Obama, the 46-year-old Wiley grew up in South Central Los Angeles, one of 6 children raised by his mother, Freddie Mae Wiley. He credits her and public tuition-free art programs, including one that sent him to Russia at age 12, for both encouraging his talents and allowing him to first see famed artworks of the past. After graduating from the San Francisco Art Institute and Yale's Master of Fine Arts program, he quickly became an art world star, known for putting ordinary black men and women into the historical frame, often finding his models through what he calls street casting, approaching people on the street to ask if he can paint them. Wiley spent much of the pandemic in Senegal, where he's established a studio and arts residency program. The works in An Archaeology of Silence were mostly painted there, using local residents as models.
The whole point here, I suppose, is domination, that the painting dominates, that it subsumes you, it consumes you.
One thing he was concerned with here, heroic scale, but also the small details of a life.
It's about every small detail that goes into a person's day-to-day, how they adorn themselves in the morning and how they dress themselves. And this is simply slowing down and paying attention to every single detail of a life. Every single crease and fold of a hand, every single hair follicle. Precious.
Again, Wiley has in mind old masters' paintings.
Look at old Dutch paintings and those collars and all of this. But really what you are looking at are powerful men who wanted to be seen powerful and got the best artists of their generation to make that happen. I want to be the best artist of my generation. I'm working my off to technically get there, but also to scour the world and find interesting subject matter. And I think the subject matter that most interests me is the story of people who were oftentimes ignored. And you don't have to go far and wide to find that. All you have to do is slow down and look around you.
Wiley has also taken this idea into the very public realm of monuments. But his hero on horseback is a contemporary African-American man wearing Nikes. His Rumors of War was first shown in New York's Times Square, before being given a permanent home in Richmond, Virginia, near that city's famed but controversial Confederate monuments.
I remember looking at some of those Confederate sculptures down in Virginia and being absolutely, number one, horrified, number two, enthralled, and number three, inspired.
Inspired to do what?
Inspired to have my response to it. Inspired to be able to hack that language of power and control, that language of domination and terror, real sheer terror.
But take what you see there and
deconstruct it, shoot it out in a different form, shoot it out in a loving form, shoot it out in a way that says there's got to be more than this.
He's created a new version of this in his current show, a huge bronze horse, but this time with a fallen black rider. It's all part of playing with past and present, stereotypes and realities. You referred to yourself as a trickster.
I think every artist is, in a way. It's a type of alchemy, if it were. As though we know the received world, the one that we're handed, where black men are seen as antisocial, a propensity towards sports, hypersexuality. And then we take these monstrous images and we breathe life into them. We try to create something that's actual, something that's a bit tricky, a bit magical. It's an unfortunate state of affairs in which creating a corrective lens for the world that you occupy is the magic, but I think that's where we are.
Kehinde Wiley's exhibition, An Archaeology of Silence, is up through October 15th. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown at the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco.
And there is a lot more online at pbs.org/newshour, including how the high cost of staying in touch with family and friends from prison burdens incarcerated people even after their release.
And join us again here tomorrow night when we'll have the latest on the arraignment of former President Trump in New York. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. Thanks for being with us. Have a great evening.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
For 25 years, Consumer Cellular's goal has been to provide wireless service that helps people communicate and connect. We offer a variety of no-contract plans, and our U.S.-based customer service team can help find one that fits you. To learn more, visit consumercellular.tv.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner, and Kathy and Paul Anderson. The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. Funding for America at a Crossroads was provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.
On episode 1 of La Frontera, the US-Mexico border has the most crossings of anywhere in the world. And on this episode, I'm going to the busiest place on the map, California and Baja California, where binational collaborations and the blending of cultures is an opportunity for explosive creativity and growth.
Good job. Yay!
Tonight at 8.
When actor Richard E. Grant follows the footsteps of great authors,
I travel not to go anywhere, but to go.
he discovers what inspired his favorite novels.
Catapulted back into the past.
The stunning places, cultures, and cuisines.
Delicious.
Behind these famous books.
Trying to reimagine what life was like here, whilst knowing that you're walking amongst the dead.
Right around the world.
Tonight at 9.
Our audience is why we do what we do, and the broad support we receive from our members is how we operate. And every day we come to work thinking about how to better serve our audience, not just thinking about who we reach, but also who we aren't reaching. More than anything else, I want our members to know how grateful we are and how much we appreciate them. Not everyone can afford to give, not everyone can afford to support our work, and so many people need our work, and they make it possible.
And then we can see it operate. And she has a surprise, of course. There it comes.
$10,000. Are you serious?
I am serious.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, I'm not.
Oh.